Welcome back to Shocking Stories, where we uncover the most mind-bending true crime cases that will make you question the very nature of identity and the security of the life you've built. I'm your host, and today we're heading to Portland, Oregon, where a man's fight for survival after a devastating accident became a fight for his very existence when he discovered that someone else had been living his life for an entire year. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear involves a case that will make you check your ID twice and wonder whether the people who know you best would recognize an imposter in your place. This is the story of Michael Harrison, a 36-year-old architect whose life was literally stolen while he lay unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting for his life after a near-fatal car accident. When Michael finally woke up from his year-long coma, he discovered that another man had seamlessly stepped into his identity, taken over his architectural firm, moved into his house, and was living as the husband to his wife Sarah and father to his 8-year-old daughter Emma. Picture this. It's 7:43 a.m. on October 15, 2024, and Michael Harrison's eyes flutter open for the first time in 374 days. The last thing he remembers is driving home from a client meeting on a rainy November evening in 2023, when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into his car at 65 miles per hour. Now, as consciousness slowly returns, Michael finds himself staring at a hospital ceiling he doesn't recognize, with no memory of the past year and no understanding of how dramatically his world has changed. When Michael first woke up, he was completely disoriented, recalled Dr. Patricia Chen, the neurologist who had been overseeing his care at Portland General Hospital. He kept asking for his wife Sarah and wanting to know how long he had been unconscious. When we told him it had been over a year, he became agitated and insisted that we contact his family immediately. He had no idea that his family believed he was already home. Michael Harrison had been a successful architect and partner at Harrison & Associates, a prestigious firm he had built with his college roommate David Walsh. Michael lived in a beautiful craftsman house in Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood with his wife Sarah, a marketing executive, and their daughter Emma, who had just started second grade when the accident occurred. The car accident on November 8, 2023, had been devastating. Michael had suffered severe traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, and internal injuries that required numerous surgeries and left him in a medically induced coma for months. Doctors had warned Sarah that even if Michael survived, he might never wake up, and if he did, he could have permanent brain damage that would fundamentally change who he was. The first few months after the accident were the worst period of my life, Sarah Harrison would later tell investigators, her voice breaking as she recalled the trauma of nearly losing her husband. The doctors said Michael might never wake up, and even if he did, he might not remember us or be able to function normally. I was preparing for the possibility that I might have to raise Emma as a single mother. But what Sarah didn't know was that someone had been watching her family's tragedy unfold and had seen an opportunity to step into the life that Michael might never reclaim. The man who would steal Michael's identity was Daniel Morrison, a 37-year-old drifter with a history of identity theft and fraud who had been living in Portland under various false names for the past several years. Daniel bore a striking physical resemblance to Michael. The same height, similar build, dark hair, and facial features that could pass for Michael's in casual observation. Daniel had learned about Michael's accident from local news coverage and had become obsessed with the idea of assuming Michael's identity while he was incapacitated. Unlike typical identity theft cases that focus on financial fraud, Daniel wanted to steal Michael's entire life, his career, his family, his social relationships, and his place in the community. Daniel Morrison wasn't just a common criminal looking to make quick money, explained FBI Special Agent Jennifer Martinez, who would later investigate the case. He was a sophisticated identity thief who had studied Michael's life in detail and had developed a comprehensive plan to replace him entirely. This wasn't fraud, this was identity assassination. Daniel's plan began while Michael was still in his coma, fighting for his life in the hospital. Daniel started by conducting extensive research into Michael's background, studying his social media profiles, his business relationships, his family history, and every detail of his personal and professional life that he could find online. Daniel spent months learning to become Michael Harrison, Agent Martinez continued. He studied Michael's mannerisms from videos posted on social media, learned about his professional projects by researching the architectural firm's website, and even practiced mimicking Michael's signature and handwriting style. But Daniel's most crucial preparation involved studying Michael's family relationships and understanding the dynamics between Michael, Sarah, and Emma. Daniel knew that successfully impersonating Michael would require more than just looking like him. He would need to know intimate details about family memories, inside jokes, and personal relationships that only the real Michael would know. The opportunity Daniel had been waiting for came in April 2024, 5 months after Michael's accident, when doctors began discussing the possibility of transferring Michael to a long-term care facility if he didn't wake up soon. Sarah was emotionally and financially exhausted from the medical bills and the stress of maintaining hope while preparing for the worst. "I was at my breaking point," Sarah admitted during her later interview with investigators. "The doctors were saying that Michael might never wake up, and I was facing the reality that I might have to make decisions about long-term care. I was so focused on medical decisions and taking care of Emma that I wasn't paying attention to other things." Daniel's infiltration of Michael's life began gradually and strategically. He started by appearing at locations where Sarah might see him, always from a distance and always in circumstances where she would only catch glimpses of someone who looked like her husband. His goal was to plant seeds of confusion and hope that would make Sarah more receptive to believing that Michael had somehow recovered and returned home. Daniel would position himself where Sarah might see him during her daily routines, Agent Martinez explained. At Emma's school, at the grocery store, at the coffee shop Sarah frequented. He was creating a psychological foundation for his eventual approach, making Sarah subconsciously familiar with seeing someone who looked like Michael in normal, everyday situations. The crucial moment came on May 15, 2024, when Daniel approached Sarah outside Portland General Hospital as she was leaving after visiting Michael's comatose body. Daniel, dressed in clothes similar to what Michael would wear and carrying a bouquet of flowers, approached Sarah with a story that would change everything. "Sarah," Daniel called out, his voice carefully modulated to match Michael's tone and speech patterns. "Sarah, it's me. I know this is confusing, but I need you to listen to me." Sarah's reaction was exactly what Daniel had hoped for: shock, confusion, and desperate hope that somehow her husband had miraculously recovered and was standing in front of her. "I thought I was having a breakdown," Sarah later testified. "The man looked exactly like Michael, sounded like Michael, and knew things about our family that only Michael would know. But I had just left Michael's room where he was still in a coma. It was impossible, but I wanted so desperately for it to be real." Daniel's explanation was carefully crafted to exploit Sarah's emotional vulnerability and medical ignorance. He claimed that he had been in a specialized treatment facility run by experimental doctors who had used advanced techniques to help him recover while his body remained in the hospital as a form of consciousness transfer therapy. "I know it sounds impossible," Daniel told Sarah, using terminology he had researched to make his story sound plausible. "But the doctors were using my consciousness in experimental treatment while my body recovered in the hospital. I can't explain all the science, but I'm here, I'm real, and I remember everything about our life together." To Sarah, who had been praying for a miracle for months, Daniel's explanation seemed like the answer to her desperate hopes. The medical terminology sounded convincing, and Daniel's intimate knowledge of their family life seemed to prove that he was really Michael, somehow returned to her through means she didn't understand but didn't need to question. "I wanted to believe it so badly that I didn't think clearly about how impossible it was," Sarah admitted. "He knew about Emma's favorite bedtime story, he remembered our anniversary dinner, he could describe the layout of our house perfectly. How could he know those things if he wasn't really Michael?" What Sarah didn't realize was that Daniel had spent months researching every detail of their lives through social media, public records, and careful observation. He had learned about Emma's interests by watching her at school, had discovered family memories by studying photos and posts that Sarah had shared online, and had gained intimate knowledge of their home by conducting surveillance of their daily routines. Daniel's first test came when he accompanied Sarah home to see Emma. The 8-year-old's reaction would be crucial to establishing his credibility as her father, and Daniel had prepared extensively for this moment by studying Emma's personality and interests. "Daddy," Emma cried when she saw Daniel, running into his arms with the unquestioning trust of a child who had missed her father desperately for months. "I knew you would come back. Mommy said you were sleeping in the hospital, but I knew you would wake up and come home." Daniel's emotional manipulation of Emma was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of his scheme. He had studied her drawings, her school projects, and her social interactions to understand exactly how to respond to her as a father would, exploiting her innocent love and trust to solidify his position in the family. Daniel knew exactly what to say to Emma to convince her that he was her father, Agent Martinez observed. He had learned about her interests, her fears, her favorite activities, and her relationships with friends. He was able to engage with her in ways that seemed natural and loving, when in reality he was manipulating a child's emotions to further his criminal scheme. For the next 5 months, Daniel lived as Michael Harrison, running the architectural firm, parenting Emma, and maintaining intimate relationships with everyone in Michael's life. He was so convincing that nobody, not Sarah, not Emma, not Michael's business partner, not his closest friends, suspected that they were dealing with an impostor. Daniel had done his homework so thoroughly that he was able to fool everyone who knew Michael, Agent Martinez continued. He knew Michael's professional projects, his personal relationships, his habits, his preferences, and his history well enough to maintain the illusion perfectly. It was one of the most sophisticated identity thefts we had ever investigated. But Daniel's perfect crime began to unravel on October 15, 2024, when the real Michael Harrison finally woke up from his coma and began asking questions about his family that would expose the shocking truth about what had happened during his year of unconsciousness. "I want to see my wife and daughter," were Michael's first coherent words upon waking up, Dr. Chen recalled. He was confused about the date and how long he had been unconscious, but he was very clear about wanting to be reunited with his family. "That's when we realized we had a problem, because according to our records, his family thought he was already home with them." The hospital staff's confusion about Michael's family situation would be the first crack in Daniel's carefully constructed deception. When nurses tried to contact Sarah to tell her that Michael had woken up, they discovered that she believed Michael had been living at home with her for the past 5 months. "When I got the call from the hospital saying that Michael had woken up, I thought there had been some kind of mistake," Sarah later testified. "I told them that was impossible because Michael was at home with me, sleeping in our bed." The nurse seemed confused and asked me to come to the hospital immediately to clear up the confusion. The moment when Sarah walked into Michael's hospital room and saw her real husband for the first time in almost a year would shatter her understanding of reality and begin the process of exposing one of the most audacious identity theft schemes in criminal history. The confrontation between Sarah and the real Michael was devastating for both of them. Sarah found herself face to face with her actual husband, thinner from his medical ordeal, showing signs of his traumatic injuries, but undeniably the man she had married, while grappling with the impossible reality that she had been living with an impostor for months. "I felt like I was losing my mind," Sarah described the moment. The man in the hospital bed was clearly Michael. I could see it in his eyes, his expressions, the way he looked at me. But I had been living with someone who I was absolutely convinced was also Michael. It was like my entire reality had been turned upside down. Michael's confusion was equally profound. From his perspective, he had been unconscious for what felt like a few days, but was being told that over a year had passed and that his family had been living with someone else who was pretending to be him. "I couldn't understand what Sarah was telling me," Michael recalled during his later testimony. "She was saying that someone who looked like me had been living in our house, sleeping in our bed, taking care of Emma, and running my business. It sounded like something out of a science fiction movie. I thought maybe the brain injury had affected her memory or that she was having some kind of breakdown." The immediate priority was confirming Michael's identity through medical records, fingerprints, and DNA testing. While hospital staff worked to verify that the man in the hospital bed was indeed the real Michael Harrison, Portland police were dispatched to the Harrison family home to investigate the man who had been impersonating him. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at 1247 Laurelhurst Street at 2:30 p.m. on October 15, where she found Daniel Morrison calmly preparing dinner for Emma, who had just returned from school. Daniel's response to the police visit would demonstrate just how thoroughly he had convinced himself that he deserved to live Michael's life. Daniel didn't seem surprised to see us, Detective Martinez recalled. He was polite, cooperative, and acted like he was exactly who he claimed to be. "When I told him that the real Michael Harrison had woken up from his coma and was asking for his family," Daniel claimed that there had been some kind of mistake or confusion at the hospital. Daniel's insistence that he was the real Michael Harrison created a surreal situation where police were dealing with two men who both claimed to be the same person, both of whom had intimate knowledge of Michael's life, and both of whom were emotionally connected to Sarah and Emma in ways that seemed genuine. Emma kept asking why the police were there and whether her daddy was in trouble, Detective Martinez continued. She was completely confused about why we were questioning the man she believed was her father. To her, Daniel was the person who had been reading her bedtime stories, helping with homework, and taking care of her for months. The resolution came through biometric verification that conclusively proved that the man in the hospital was the real Michael Harrison, while the man living in Michael's house was Daniel Morrison, a career criminal with outstanding warrants for identity theft in 3 other states. The fingerprint and DNA evidence was conclusive, Detective Martinez explained. Daniel Morrison had been living a complete lie for 5 months, but the science didn't lie. Michael Harrison was in that hospital bed, and Daniel Morrison was a criminal who had stolen his identity and infiltrated his family. Daniel's arrest was traumatic for Emma, who couldn't understand why police were taking away the man she believed was her father. The psychological impact on an 8-year-old child who had bonded with an impostor while her real father was fighting for his life would require years of therapy to address. Emma's confusion and trauma were heartbreaking, said child psychologist Dr. Patricia Moore, who worked with the family during their recovery. From her perspective, her father had come back from the hospital, they had rebuilt their relationship, and now that same person was being arrested and taken away. She couldn't understand that the person she had been living with wasn't really her father. Like this video if you're as shocked by Daniel's elaborate deception as I am, and let me know in the comments how you think someone could fool an entire family for 5 months. Don't forget to subscribe because in part 2, we're going to reveal the full extent of Daniel's identity theft operation and discover how deep his manipulation went into every aspect of Michael's life. The investigation would uncover crimes that went far beyond simple impersonation. Welcome back to Shocking Stories. When we left off, Daniel Morrison had been arrested for impersonating Michael Harrison, but the investigation was just beginning to reveal the sophisticated nature of his identity theft operation. What authorities discovered when they examined Daniel's methods would expose one of the most comprehensive cases of identity replacement in criminal history. A scheme that went far beyond stealing documents to actually stealing a man's entire existence. The FBI's investigation into Daniel Morrison's identity theft operation began immediately after his arrest, with Special Agent Jennifer Martinez leading a team of specialists in identity crimes, digital forensics, and psychological profiling. What they found would challenge every assumption about how identity theft works and reveal a criminal who had turned impersonation into an art form. Daniel Morrison wasn't just stealing Michael's identity for financial gain. Agent Martinez explained to the federal task force assembled to investigate the case. He had created a complete psychological and social replacement of another human being. This was identity theft elevated to the level of identity assassination. The investigation revealed that Daniel had been planning his impersonation of Michael Harrison for over 8 months before making contact with Sarah. During that time, he had conducted surveillance that would have impressed professional intelligence agencies, learning every detail of Michael's life, habits, relationships, and personality. Daniel had essentially become a stalker who was studying his victim to replace him rather than harm him, Agent Martinez continued. He had taken thousands of photographs, recorded hours of video, and compiled detailed files on every aspect of Michael's personal and professional life. Daniel's preparation had begun with basic identity research, social security numbers, financial records, and personal history, but had quickly evolved into something far more sophisticated. He had studied Michael's body language, speech patterns, and social interactions to understand not just what Michael knew, but how Michael behaved in different situations. The level of detail in Daniel's preparation was extraordinary, observed FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Michael Torres. He had analyzed Michael's personality, his relationships with different people, his professional expertise, and even his emotional responses to various situations. Daniel hadn't just stolen Michael's identity, he had studied how to become Michael Harrison. The evidence recovered from Daniel's apartment revealed the scope of his preparation. FBI agents found detailed files on every member of Michael's family, complete with personal histories, personality analyses, and strategic plans for maintaining relationships with each person. Daniel had files on Sarah, Emma, Michael's parents, his business partner, his closest friends, and even his neighbors, Agent Martinez revealed. Each file contained detailed information about their relationships with Michael, their personalities, and specific strategies for interacting with them convincingly. The file on Emma was particularly disturbing, as it revealed how Daniel had studied an 8-year-old child to understand how to manipulate her emotions and gain her trust. Daniel had researched her school activities, her friendships, her fears, and her interests to create a playbook for acting as her father. Daniel's file on Emma contained her artwork that he had somehow obtained, notes about her favorite activities, and even psychological observations about her attachment style and emotional needs, Dr. Torres explained. He had studied this child like a case study to understand how to exploit her natural trust and love for her father. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was that Daniel had been practicing his impersonation of Michael for months before approaching the family. He had rented an apartment that he had decorated to match Michael's home office, had practiced Michael's signature and handwriting for hours each day, and had even studied architectural principles to be able to maintain Michael's professional reputation. Daniel had created a training facility for becoming Michael Harrison, Agent Martinez observed. He had floor plans of Michael's house, copies of Michael's work projects, and even recordings of Michael's voice that he used to practice matching his speech patterns. The investigation also revealed that Daniel had been using sophisticated technology to support his impersonation, including deepfake software that allowed him to create convincing video calls as Michael, and voice modulation equipment that helped him match Michael's vocal characteristics perfectly. Daniel was using technology that most people don't even know exists, explained FBI cybercrime specialist Dr. Lisa Chen. He had software that could analyze Michael's voice patterns and help him modify his own voice to match. He had facial recognition programs that helped him understand which expressions and mannerisms were most characteristic of Michael's personality. But the most disturbing aspect of Daniel's preparation was his psychological manipulation of Sarah during the months leading up to his approach. The investigation revealed that Daniel had been orchestrating sightings and near encounters for months, conditioning Sarah to subconsciously expect to see Michael outside of the hospital setting. Daniel had been psychologically priming Sarah for his eventual approach, Dr. Torres explained. By creating subtle encounters where she would briefly see someone who looked like Michael in normal settings, he was making her more receptive to believing that Michael could somehow be recovered and functioning outside of the hospital. The financial aspect of Daniel's crime was also extensive. During his 5 months as Michael Harrison, Daniel had gained access to Michael's bank accounts, retirement savings, and business assets. He had used Michael's credit cards, had taken out loans in Michael's name, and had even made significant business decisions that affected Michael's architectural firm. Daniel had essentially been living Michael's financial life while Michael was unconscious, FBI financial crime specialist Robert Kim revealed. He had access to hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets, and he had been spending money, making investments, and conducting business as if he were the legitimate owner of those resources. The investigation into Daniel's business activities revealed that he had been making architectural decisions that were beyond his actual expertise, potentially putting Michael's professional reputation and legal liability at risk. Daniel had been approving building plans, meeting with clients, and making design decisions that could have resulted in serious professional and legal consequences for the real Michael. Daniel had been practicing architecture without a license while impersonating Michael, Agent Martinez explained. He had been making decisions about building designs and construction projects that could have resulted in safety issues, legal problems, and professional sanctions that would have destroyed Michael's career even after he recovered. But perhaps the most devastating discovery was the extent to which Daniel had manipulated Emma's emotions and sense of security. Child psychologists analyzing Daniel's interactions with Emma found evidence that he had been deliberately creating dependency and attachment that would make it traumatic for her when the truth was eventually revealed. Daniel had been actively working to make Emma more attached to him than she had been to her real father, Drive. Patricia Moore, the child psychologist working with the family, explained. He had studied child psychology and had been using techniques designed to create strong emotional bonds that would be difficult for Emma to understand or overcome. The investigation also revealed that Daniel had been documenting his successful impersonation, keeping detailed records of his interactions with Sarah and Emma, and even maintaining what appeared to be a journal of his experience living as Michael Harrison. Daniel's journal entries showed that he had begun to believe his own deception, Dr. Torres observed. He was writing about Sarah and Emma as if they were really his family, and he was expressing genuine emotions about his relationships with them. The line between performance and reality had become blurred in his own mind. The psychological evaluation of Daniel Morrison revealed a complex criminal personality that combined sophisticated planning abilities with deep-seated identity issues and a desperate need for belonging and acceptance. Daniel wasn't just a criminal looking for financial gain, Dr. Torres continued. He was someone who had never been able to create legitimate relationships or success in his own life, so he had developed the skills to steal someone else's life entirely. He had convinced himself that he deserved Michael's life more than Michael did. The legal case against Daniel was complicated by the unusual nature of his crimes. While identity theft laws covered the financial aspects of his offenses, prosecutors had to develop new legal theories to address the psychological manipulation, family infiltration, and the theft of personal relationships that went far beyond traditional identity crimes. Daniel Morrison had committed crimes that our legal system wasn't fully prepared to address, explained federal prosecutor Jennifer Walsh. He had stolen more than Michael's identity. He had stolen his life, his family, and his place in the community. We had to develop charges that reflected the full scope of his criminal behavior. The impact on Michael's recovery was also significant. The stress of learning that someone had been living his life while he was unconscious created additional psychological trauma that complicated his medical recovery and required extensive therapy to address. Michael was dealing with the trauma of his accident, the challenges of recovering from a year-long coma, and the shock of discovering that his entire life had been stolen, explained Dr. Chen, Michael's neurologist. The psychological impact of Daniel's crimes was almost as damaging as the original brain injury. The investigation also revealed that Daniel had been planning to disappear with Michael's identity permanently. Evidence found in his apartment showed that he had been researching ways to have the real Michael declared dead, potentially by switching medical records or creating false documentation of Michael's death. Daniel's long-term plan was to eliminate the real Michael Harrison entirely, Agent Martinez revealed. He had been researching medical fraud, identity documentation, and even investigating ways to permanently prevent Michael from reclaiming his identity if he ever woke up from the coma. The scope of Daniel's planning included backup identities, escape routes, and financial resources that would have allowed him to disappear with Michael's assets if his impersonation had ever been discovered. He had created multiple false identities, had bank accounts in different states, and had even purchased property under assumed names. Daniel had been preparing for the possibility that his deception would be discovered, Agent Martinez continued. He had multiple contingency plans that would have allowed him to disappear with Michael's money and assets, leaving the real Michael to deal with the financial and legal consequences of Daniel's actions. As the investigation progressed, authorities began to understand that Daniel Morrison was not just a career criminal, but a sophisticated identity predator who had developed techniques that could be used to steal anyone's life given enough time and planning. The Daniel Morrison case forced us to rethink how we understand identity theft and personal security, Agent Martinez reflected. He had shown that with enough preparation and psychological manipulation, it was possible for someone to steal not just your financial identity, but your entire existence. The investigation also raised disturbing questions about how many other people might be victims of similar crimes without knowing it. Daniel's sophisticated techniques and psychological expertise suggested that he might have successfully impersonated other people in the past, or that other criminals might be using similar methods. Daniel Morrison might not be unique, Dr. Torres observed. His techniques were so sophisticated and his success was so complete that we have to consider the possibility that other identity predators are operating with similar methods. The technology and psychological knowledge required for this type of crime is becoming more accessible every year. As Part 2 of our investigation concludes, Daniel Morrison sits in federal custody facing charges that could result in life imprisonment for what prosecutors are calling identity assassination. But the most challenging part of the case was still ahead: helping Michael Harrison rebuild his life and identity while dealing with the trauma of learning that someone had been living as him for 5 months. Don't miss Part 3, where we'll reveal Daniel's trial and the shocking details of his psychological manipulation. Explore how Michael and his family began the process of rebuilding their lives and relationships, and examine how this case changed the way law enforcement investigates identity theft. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell, because the conclusion of this story will show you how one family survived the ultimate violation of trust and identity. What do you think motivates someone to steal another person's entire life rather than just their money? Let me know in the comments, and share this video to help others understand the sophisticated threats that exist in our connected world where personal information can be weaponized by criminals with enough skill and determination. Welcome back to the shocking conclusion of our investigation into the stolen identity case. When we left off, Daniel Morrison had been exposed as an elaborate impostor who had spent 5 months living as Michael Harrison while the real Michael lay unconscious in a hospital bed. What happened next would test the limits of the legal system, challenge the foundations of identity verification, and force a family to rebuild relationships that had been manipulated by a master of deception. The trial of Daniel Morrison began on March 15, 2025, in U.S. District Court for the District of Oregon, presided over by Judge Patricia Wilson. The case had attracted national attention not just because of the audacious nature of Daniel's crimes, but because it represented a new category of identity theft that existing laws were barely equipped to address. The Daniel Morrison case forced our legal system to confront questions about identity, family relationships, and psychological manipulation that we had never had to consider before, Judge Wilson explained during pre-trial hearings. How do you prosecute someone for stealing not just a person's financial identity, but their entire existence, including their most intimate relationships? Federal prosecutor Jennifer Walsh faced the challenge of proving that Daniel's actions went beyond traditional identity theft and constituted a form of psychological terrorism that had devastated an entire family. The prosecution's case would need to demonstrate not just the financial damages, but the emotional and psychological harm caused by Daniel's elaborate deception. Daniel Morrison didn't just steal Michael Harrison's money or credit. He stole his life, his family, and his identity in the most fundamental sense, Walsh told the jury during opening statements. He violated the most sacred bonds of family trust and turned love itself into a weapon of manipulation and control. The defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney Michael Stevens, faced an almost impossible task. Daniel's crimes were clearly documented, his deception was thoroughly exposed, and the evidence of his sophisticated planning was overwhelming. Their only strategy was to argue that Daniel suffered from psychological disorders that had driven him to commit crimes he couldn't fully understand or control. "My client is not a master criminal or a psychological terrorist," Stevens argued during his opening statement. Daniel Morrison is a deeply disturbed individual whose untreated mental illness led him to create an elaborate fantasy that he genuinely believed was real. His actions were wrong, but they were the result of psychological dysfunction rather than criminal intent. But the prosecution's case methodically demonstrated that Daniel's actions had been too sophisticated and well planned to be the result of mental illness alone. The evidence showed years of preparation, careful study of his victims, and deliberate choices designed to maximize his success while minimizing his risk of detection. The first phase of the trial focused on the impact of Daniel's crimes on Michael and his family. Michael himself testified about the psychological trauma of waking up to discover that someone had been living his life, sleeping in his bed, and parenting his daughter while he was unconscious. "I lost more than a year of my life to the coma," Michael testified, his voice steady despite the visible emotion. "But Daniel Morrison tried to steal my entire future. He didn't just take my identity, he tried to replace me completely, to make it so that I would have nothing and no one to come back to if I ever woke up." Sarah's testimony was particularly powerful as she described the psychological manipulation she had experienced and the devastating realization that she had been living with a stranger who had exploited her grief and desperation. "Daniel knew exactly how to manipulate my emotions," Sarah testified through tears. "He understood that I was desperate for Michael to come back, and he used that desperation against me. He made me believe that my prayers had been answered, when in reality he was victimizing our family in the cruelest way possible." The most heartbreaking testimony came from child psychologist Dr. Patricia Moore, who described the impact of Daniel's deception on 8-year-old Emma and the long-term psychological damage that would require years of therapy to address. Emma had formed a genuine attachment to Daniel Morrison, believing he was her father, Dr. Moore testified. When the truth was revealed, She experienced what can only be described as a form of psychological trauma similar to losing a parent to death, except that her grief was complicated by the knowledge that the person she had been living with was never really her father at all. The prosecution also presented extensive evidence of Daniel's sophisticated preparation and planning, including the detailed files he had compiled on each family member and the psychological techniques he had used to maintain his deception. FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Michael Torres testified about Daniel's use of cult-like manipulation techniques to control Sarah's perceptions and maintain her belief in his false identity. Daniel Morrison employed classic psychological manipulation techniques that are typically seen in cults or abusive relationships, Dr. Torres explained to the jury. He used love bombing, gaslighting, and isolation to control Sarah's ability to think critically about inconsistencies in his behavior. He turned her love for her husband into a weapon against her own judgment. The financial evidence revealed that Daniel had stolen over $400,000 from Michael's accounts and had made business decisions that had put Michael's architectural firm at risk. He had also taken out loans and made financial commitments in Michael's name that would have created serious legal liabilities for the real Michael. Daniel Morrison's financial crimes alone would have destroyed Michael Harrison's life even if the identity theft had never been discovered, testified FBI financial crimes specialist Robert Kim. He had created debt, legal obligations, and business liabilities that would have taken years for Michael to resolve. But perhaps the most damning evidence was Daniel's own journal, which revealed his awareness of the harm he was causing and his deliberate choice to continue his deception even as he began to understand the psychological damage he was inflicting on his victims. Daniel's journal entries showed that he understood Sarah was becoming emotionally dependent on him and that Emma was forming attachments that would be traumatic to break, prosecutor Walsh argued. But instead of ending his deception, he chose to continue and even intensify his manipulation because he enjoyed the power and control it gave him. The defense team's attempts to portray Daniel as mentally ill were undermined by evidence of his sophisticated planning and his ability to maintain other aspects of his life normally while conducting his impersonation of Michael. Daniel Morrison was employed, maintained relationships, and functioned normally in every other aspect of his life, prosecutor Walsh countered. His ability to plan and execute such a sophisticated crime while maintaining normal function in other areas proves that he was fully aware of his actions and their consequences. The trial also featured expert testimony about the broader implications of Daniel's crimes and the new categories of identity theft that technology and social media had made possible. The Daniel Morrison case represents an evolution in identity crime, testified Dr. Lisa Chen, the FBI's cybercrime specialist. Social media and digital technology have made it possible for criminals to study their victims in ways that were never possible before, allowing for impersonations that go far beyond financial fraud to complete identity replacement. The defense team's psychiatric expert, Dr. Robert Kim, testified that Daniel suffered from dissociative identity disorder and other psychological conditions that had made him genuinely believe he deserved to live Michael's life. Daniel Morrison's psychological evaluation revealed severe personality disorders and a dissociative condition that caused him to lose touch with reality, Dr. Kim testified. In his mind, he had convinced himself that he was saving Michael's family by stepping into a role that Michael could no longer fill. But the prosecution's rebuttal expert, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, countered that Daniel's journals and behavior showed clear awareness of reality and deliberate criminal planning that was inconsistent with serious mental illness. Daniel Morrison may have personality disorders, but his actions show clear criminal intent and awareness of wrongdoing, Dr. Martinez testified. He took elaborate steps to avoid detection, he planned for contingencies, and he documented his crimes in ways that show he understood exactly what he was doing. The jury deliberated for 4 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges, including identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and what prosecutors successfully argued was a form of domestic terrorism involving the psychological manipulation of family relationships. During the sentencing phase, Michael Harrison delivered a victim impact statement that powerfully articulated the unique nature of the harm Daniel had caused and the long-term impact on his family's ability to trust and form relationships. Daniel Morrison didn't just steal my identity, he stole my family's ability to trust, Michael told the court. He turned our love for each other into weapons against us. Sarah will always wonder if she can trust her own judgment about the people she loves. Emma will always have complicated feelings about attachment and loss that no child should have to carry. Daniel didn't just commit a crime. He damaged our family's capacity for love and trust in ways that may never fully heal. Judge Wilson sentenced Daniel Morrison to 45 years in federal prison, calling his crimes a systematic assault on the fundamental bonds of family and identity that represent the foundation of our society. Mr. Morrison, you have committed crimes that challenge our basic understanding of identity, family, and human relationships, Judge Wilson said during sentencing. You have shown that the most intimate bonds of love and trust can be weaponized by those willing to exploit human vulnerability for their own benefit. Your crimes represent a betrayal of everything that makes us human. The legal precedent established by the Daniel Morrison case led to new federal legislation specifically addressing identity replacement crimes and providing enhanced penalties for criminals who target family relationships and personal identity for theft and manipulation. The Morrison case forced Congress to recognize that identity theft had evolved beyond financial crimes to include the theft of personal relationships and social identity, explained Senator Patricia Martinez, who sponsored the new legislation. We needed laws that addressed the full scope of harm that these crimes can cause to families and communities. The recovery process for Michael and his family was long and complicated, requiring extensive therapy to address the psychological trauma and rebuild relationships that had been damaged by Daniel's manipulation. Michael and Sarah had to essentially rebuild their marriage from the ground up, explained family therapist Dr. Janet Williams, who worked with the Harrison family during their recovery. Sarah had formed memories and emotional connections with Daniel while believing he was Michael, and Michael had to deal with the knowledge that his wife and daughter had been living with an impostor for months. Emma's recovery was particularly challenging, as she had to understand that the person she had believed was her father for 5 months had actually been a stranger who was manipulating her emotions for criminal purposes. Emma experienced a form of complicated grief that is rarely seen in children, Dr. Moore explained. She had to mourn the loss of someone who had never really existed while rebuilding her relationship with her real father, who was essentially a stranger to her after his year-long absence. Michael's professional recovery was also difficult, as he had to address the business decisions Daniel had made in his name and rebuild relationships with clients who had been interacting with an impostor for months. Michael had to essentially audit his entire professional life to understand what Daniel had done while impersonating him, explained business attorney Lisa Chen, who helped Michael address the legal and financial consequences of Daniel's actions. Some of Daniel's decisions had created legal liabilities and professional obligations that took years to resolve. The Harrison family's experience led to new protocols for medical facilities treating comatose patients, including enhanced identity verification procedures and improved communication with family members about patient status and recovery. The Morrison case taught us that we need better systems for protecting the identities of vulnerable patients and maintaining accurate communication with families about patient status, explained Dr. Patricia Chen, who helped develop new protocols at Portland General Hospital. We now have procedures designed to prevent identity theft and ensure that families have accurate information about their loved ones' conditions. The case also sparked broader discussions about privacy, social media, and the information we share online that can be used by criminals to study and impersonate us. The Daniel Morrison case is a warning about how much personal information we make available through social media and digital platforms, observed privacy expert Dr. Robert Kim. Criminals with enough time and motivation can use this information to build comprehensive profiles that enable sophisticated impersonation and manipulation. As our investigation into the stolen identity case concludes, Daniel Morrison remains in federal prison, where he continues to maintain that he genuinely believed he was helping Michael's family by taking care of them when Michael couldn't. Daniel still doesn't seem to understand the full scope of the harm he caused, reported prison psychologist Dr. Michael Torres. He talks about Sarah and Emma as if they were really his family, and he expresses genuine confusion about why they can't understand that he was trying to help them. His complete lack of insight into the nature of his crimes suggests that he remains a danger to others. Michael Harrison has made a remarkable recovery from both his medical injuries and the psychological trauma of Daniel's identity theft. He has rebuilt his architectural practice, restored his family relationships, and become an advocate for victims of sophisticated identity crimes. Michael has shown extraordinary resilience in overcoming both the physical trauma of his accident and the psychological trauma of having his identity stolen, Dr. Williams observed. He and his family have worked hard to rebuild their relationships and create new memories that aren't tainted by Daniel's deception. Sarah Harrison has also become an advocate for victims of psychological manipulation and identity theft, speaking to law enforcement and mental health professionals about recognizing the warning signs of sophisticated deception. Sarah wants to help other potential victims understand how sophisticated identity criminals can be, Dr. Williams continued. She emphasizes that intelligent, educated people can be victimized by criminals who understand how to exploit grief, hope, and love as tools of manipulation. Emma Harrison, now 10 years old, continues to receive counseling to address the psychological impact of her experience with Daniel, but has shown remarkable resilience in rebuilding her relationship with her real father. Emma has learned to distinguish between real memories with her father and false memories created during her time with Daniel, Dr. Moore reported. She's developing healthy attachments and learning to trust her own feelings and perceptions again. The Harrison family's story serves as both a warning about the sophisticated threats that exist in our connected world and a testament to the resilience of families who refuse to let criminals destroy their bonds of love and trust. The Morrison case reminds us that our identities are more vulnerable than we like to believe, reflected FBI Special Agent Jennifer Martinez. But it also shows us that families can survive even the most sophisticated attacks on their relationships if they're willing to work together to rebuild what was damaged. If this incredible story of identity theft, psychological manipulation, and family resilience has moved you as much as it has moved us, please like this video and share it to help others understand the sophisticated threats that exist in our digital age. Subscribe to Shocking Stories for more investigations that expose how criminals exploit our trust and technology while celebrating the survivors who find the strength to rebuild their lives after devastating attacks on their identity and relationships. Daniel Morrison may have succeeded in stealing Michael Harrison's life for 5 months, but he couldn't steal the love, determination, and resilience that ultimately allowed the Harrison family to reclaim their identity and rebuild their relationships stronger than ever before. The stolen identity case reminds us that in an age of digital connectivity and social media oversharing, we must be vigilant about protecting not just our financial information, but the personal details and relationships that define who we are. Sometimes the greatest threat to our identity comes not from hackers in distant countries, but from predators who study us so carefully that they can literally step into our lives and convince even our loved ones that they belong there.